I must play every game I get an ad for immediately. Warcraft Rumble is such a low-key game published by the absolutely huge video games company Blizzard. I'm shocked that I've never heard of this game up until now, and at the time of recording, it was released like 2 to 3 weeks ago. It was rated 4.3 stars on Google Play and had 1 million downloads. In classic Blizzard fashion, this game was very well done in terms of theming and art style. All the art, scenery, and models were done with the perspective of this being a fun board game by the fire, using wind-up toys. Blizzard always does a fantastic job making their games holistically stylized, and it never ceases to amaze me. One of my favorite games, though not initially a phone game, was Hearthstone. Regardless of what you think of Blizzard as a company, this game had absolutely amazing art, and every aspect from the world map to the individual buffs you can obtain was done in matching style. The game started with an absolutely amazing cutscene. It didn't show gameplay, but it set the scene of how the game would be styled as. The game also had an excellent tutorial explaining both how to progress in the game and the mechanics of each battle. It wasn't too hand-holdy, but it definitely explained the mechanics very thoroughly, and I was able to immediately understand how the game would be played. There was no voice acting, which is completely fine. This type of game, I don't really expect it, but the NPCs and unit had sounds that they made, which made the game feel alive. The gameplay mechanics is very similar to Clash Royale. We'll talk more about the similarities later in this video. But for those who haven't played this type of game before, the mechanics are relatively simple. Each player or NPC starts with a certain amount of units or spells that they cycle throughout the game. Each unit costs a certain amount of resources to spawn, and all have their own unique niches that they fill. Very simply, some were melee, some were ranged, and some could fly. There were a variety of spells, but more generally, they were able to do a certain amount of damage anywhere in the map and could spawn units sometimes. You could only spawn units near your base or at a captured spawn point. There were some pretty fun interactables in the map, one of them being the spawn point you can capture. There were also things you could capture and gather for more resources to spawn your units, and some other fun things like towers that can do damage. The first player or NPC to defeat the other person's tower, fort, or boss wins the game. This game is Blizzard's attempt at a Clash Royale style game. Looking at the menu and the basic mechanics, it looks exactly the same as Clash Royale. Having played Clash Royale for many years in the past, I could not avoid seeing the blatant similarities. Even though the base of the game and progression style is basically the same, they did, in classic Blizzard fashion, make some differences that made the game a lot more interesting. The biggest difference is the addition of PvE content. Now, I haven't played Clash Royale in a couple years, so maybe they have this added in now, but back when I played it, it was PvP only. The PvE content adds such a great layer of gameplay as it allows people who may not have the time to commit to a PvP match the ability to play some content and progress in the game. I thought it was an absolute genius idea adding in PvE content. The second biggest difference is the addition of interactables in the map and some different map layouts. There were some maps with intersecting lanes and some maps with different layers. It was pretty fun to see. We mentioned the interactables earlier, but in Clash Royale they simply didn't have these. The progression of the PvE content was also pretty cool, having a map with different areas and bosses that you would have to beat to get to the next area. You would also get a decent amount of the paid currency for fighting each boss, so it was pretty rewarding to do. Each boss had its own map and different mechanics, so it was definitely fun to do. In terms of account progression, it is again very similar to Clash Royale. You would unlock new units and require dupes of them to level up. With each level, they would gain additional health and attack around 10% per level. It is very important to level units as it could easily determine the game if players with similar skill levels competed. You could get a little bit of unit levels by fighting bosses. It seemed to be completely random what units got levels. You could also get a decent chunk of unit levels by doing daily battles, whether through PvE or PvP. It would still be random, but you could choose between 2 units which one to level, so it was a bit nicer. What better time than now to talk about the other ways to get unit levels, and that is the store. Now you can spend the currency you get from PvE to unlock certain units and gain a decent amount of XP. You could also buy a tome to get XP, but that was again random as it would choose 2 random units and you can choose which one you wanted the XP on. It is again very similar to Clash Royale, but in that game it was just chests that would give a couple random units based on rarity. Of course, if you swiped, you can get currency that you can spend on buying units or random XP gain. There was also already a pack in the store that contained certain units. This game is definitely pay to win to a certain point, as hard swipers would just get higher level units a lot faster. The game's centered around the same random XP as Clash Royale, so it is a lot harder to focus the units that you want. In Clash Royale, the best way to level good units is to request and guild a specific unit daily. In this game, I'm not so sure if they have that, but I assume it would be a similar mechanic. I don't really mind this type of pay to win, I guess. Since there is PvE elements, you can kind of fully ignore PvP, so others spending money for strength won't matter. But in Clash Royale, it was definitely annoying losing to worse players that just had a massive unit advantage on you. It is expected at this point for a mobile game, but still sad. Finally, I really liked the idea of the world map. It was very cool looking at the regions you can unlock and the bosses that you could fight. I can't stress enough how much the element of PvE adds to the game. In Clash Royale, it was very easy to burn out having only PvP, and other than events, it would be the exact same PvP on the exact same map. On my emulator, the UI was pretty laggy and I couldn't find a way to change my settings, but other than that, they did a great job with it, and they had all the small QOL animations you would expect from a real game. Now it's time for the final rating of the game. My system of rating for now is 10 points for graphics, 10 points for gameplay, 10 points for story, 10 points for progression, and finally 10 points for my personal opinion on if I will continue to play the game. In total, it'll be out of 50 points or normalized to 5 stars, which is the Google Play rating scale. The graphics were 10. The graphics and theming was just simply amazing. You can't beat Blizzard's thoroughness when it comes to theming an arcade-style game. A bunch of the heroes and such were from World of Warcraft, so they had an established story and hero archetype that they could pull from easily. Again, some of the animations were a bit laggy, but that was probably just because I was on an emulator with a new game. Other than that, the animations were amazing and it felt like I was playing a real game, which is not a surprise since Blizzard has made a lot of decent computer games. Again, we won't focus on the controversies of the Blizzard company in this video, but in terms of graphics, it was amazing. Gameplay is great and I would rate it a 10 out of 10. The game honestly reminded me a lot of Clash Royale and Dungeon Defenders, oddly enough. The core gameplay was built on Clash Royale, which was an amazingly fun game. While they took notes from Dungeon Defenders on map design and how they sprinkled meaningful interactables throughout the map. Each PvE boss also had different mechanics and their own map layout, which adds to the replayability of the game. Sure, they don't get points for creativity as it is Clash Royale's core, but they added meaningful enough changes that I would definitely be willing to play this game and not return to Clash Royale even after I grinded that game for a couple years. In terms of story, I'll give it an 8. This part is a little tricky, as even though this section includes audio and voice acting, these types of games aren't really expected to have a good story and voice acting. It's like playing League of Legends and being miffed that there's no world building at the beginning. Normally for these types of games, 7 is what is expected, higher or lower is based on whether I'm positively or negatively surprised. However, a pure 7 game I would be more than willing to play. Warcraft Rumble gets one additional point as they did have a cool cutscene in the beginning and decent unit and boss sounds. Each boss had its own unique style and map, which even though there are no voice lines or conversations, does give each boss kind of their own story. In terms of progression, I'll have to give it a 6. In progressing PvE, it is great and it was super fun fighting different bosses to get to the next region. However, I absolutely hate the Clash Royale style of progressing units, and there isn't really anything else to progress in these style of games. Since it is completely random, it is super whale central, where they just swipe hundreds or thousands of dollars to try and max a specific unit, especially the new ones. You can see millions of these types of videos on Clash Royale. The fact that there is a more competitive PvP style to this game just makes it more annoying, as you can get a very tangible advantage for having higher level units. I'm not sure if there is a balanced level type of mechanic for PvP in this game, but either way, it is annoying to level up characters. Even in Hearthstone, where it contained random packs, it was pretty easy to disenchant and get a meta deck every season, even while being free to play, since you only needed to unlock the card and maybe have 2 for each deck, rather than having to also level them up for power. It sucks to rate it this low because the PvE was pretty amazing, but the core of these games is usually PvP, and now that I think of it, some PvE maps may even be really hard to do with lower level units. Finally, do I like the game and will I continue to play it? I'll have to rate it an 8 out of 10. it is definitely better than the average game. I played Clash Royale for years and I have no idea about unit balance in this game, but it has additional mechanics that adds depth to it. The PvE aspect is genius. Even though I love PvP and most games I play are centered around PvP, I can also appreciate good PvE. One thing I personally love in mobile games is actually competitive PvE, though I'm not sure if this game has that. The issue that I have is I don't think I'll really play it since it is pretty laggy on the emulator and seems to be a mobile phone exclusive game. Unlike Hearthstone, I don't really view myself grinding this game on the PC. It would just be a phone only game, which is pretty disappointing. Some of the added stuff just seems a bit too complex and almost in the way, where there are types of units that buff specific races like Horde or whatever that just kind of adds fat to the game. Part of what made Clash Royale so good is that everything was just super clean and easy to understand without having to read. In conclusion, the game got 42 out of 50 or 4.2 stars. Every time I mention a Blizzard game, I will have to add that this review does not account for the company itself and the perspective the public has on it. Whether or not games should be isolated from its publishers is to be debated, but this review does isolate it. It's honestly a fun game and I really enjoyed playing it. The theming was again on point and it is obvious when developers care about a game and take time to make it cohesive. Though I may not be actively playing it because of time constraints, I cannot deny that it, at its core, is a fun game. Also, since it is a PvP game, if there is a huge balancing issue later on, then that would suck, but this is from the point of view of early game and not having played many hours of PvP.